All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking what might initially look like a pile of dry, 250-year-old genealogical data, names, dates, land deeds, military records, and transforming it into a living, breathing story of the American dream. We're looking at a really fascinating project where a genealogist actually used artificial intelligence to give a voice to a real historical figure. We're going to see the American Revolution not from the perspective of a famous founding father on a pedestal, but through the eyes of an everyday person who lived it on the ground.
Picture this for a second. It's 1791, York County, Pennsylvania. You're hearing the voice of an aging man, Philip Jacob Konig, sitting by a fading fire, speaking to his grandchildren. He tells them, "I have watched this nation born out of blood and argument." It is a haunting, beautiful opening, and it perfectly sets the stage for a life that literally spanned continents and revolutions.
So you might be wondering, how exactly do you bring a 250-year-old stack of paper back to life? Well, we're going to explore how a researcher combined hard, documented historical facts with AI to resurrect the visceral, emotional memoir of Philip Jacob Konig. And just to be clear, every single thing we're about to discuss, every date, ship name, battle, is completely factual, pulled straight from primary sources. It's just been woven together to tell the gripping story of an immigrant, a miller, and a soldier. Section 1. Journey to the New World. Fleeing the Palatinate for Pennsylvania. Let's start at the beginning. Back in 1738, Philip's birthplace, the Rhineland-Palatinate in Germany, was essentially a worn-out land. It was blood-dry by constant wars, heavily taxed by local lords, with harsh winters and entirely uncertain harvests. But across the ocean, you had the tantalizing, untamed promise of Pennsylvania, unplowed soil, thick forests, and, crucially, land that an everyday man could actually own. For a blended family of 7 dreaming of something better, the choice was kinda a no-brainer, even if the journey itself was completely terrifying. And terrifying it was. In 1752, a 14-year-old Philip and his family boarded a ship called the Kitty. This ocean crossing wasn't a luxury cruise, guys, it was deadly. Philip recalls waves higher than rooftops, people weeping, praying, and even dying right next to him. But against the odds, his family survived. They arrived in Philadelphia, stepping off the docks into this bustling, diverse world of new languages and incredible American light. Section 2, Building Farm and Mill. Establishing roots in York County. Now, what's really interesting here is how fast Philip assimilated into this wilderness. He learned English, figured out how land was measured and taxed, and started working the soil. And in 1762, he took a very normal, everyday step. He officially became a naturalized British subject. He willingly swore an oath to His Majesty's Parliament, never imagining for a single second that just 14 years later, he'd be taking up arms and shooting at that exact same crown. Philip married his first wife, Maria Barbara, and they just got to work. They literally built wealth from absolute scratch. Philip became a miller, which meant working from before dawn until after dark, constantly covered in fine flour dust, acting as the beating heart of the local farming community. By 1790, he had 250 acres, a grist mill, a sawmill, horses, cows, sheep, the whole shebang. He built an American life with his bare hands. Which brings us to Section 3, Fighting for a Republic, the Crucible of War. The moment news of the fighting at Lexington and Concord hit Pennsylvania, Philip's life as a simple, dusty miller changed overnight. He got elected to the York County Committee of Safety. And listen, this wasn't some polite, ceremonial political club. The Committee of Safety was the actual wartime county government. They organized the militias, trained the men, supplied them. It was a literal lifeline that held men's lives in its hands. Look at the chaotic pace of 1776 for these guys. Just days after the Declaration of Independence, Philip and the York militias march out to face the British. By November, they suffer an absolute disaster at Fort Washington, losing a ton of local men. But then look at December 25th. Philip was right there when General Washington gathered his ragged, freezing troops to cross the ice-choked Delaware River in a blinding sleet storm to strike at Trenton. Reflecting on that terrifying night in the icy boats, Philip leaves us with this incredible insight. He admitted he was freezing and his hands absolutely wouldn't stop shaking. But he says, "I do not think bravery is the absence of fear. I think it is doing what needs doing while the fear is there." It's just a massive reality check, right? The people who won this country's independence weren't fearless superheroes. They were terrified farmers and millers who pushed forward anyway. Section 4. The Unsung Heroes and Tragedies.
The women of the Revolution. We really have to pause the battlefield narrative for a second because the home front was just as critical to the survival of these colonies. Philip leaves a deeply poignant tribute to his first wife, Barbara. While he was marching through New Jersey and freezing on the Delaware, she was back home keeping a massive farm running, operating a mill, and keeping 7 kids alive. Tragically, she passed away before she was even 40 years old. As Philip warns his grandkids and us, do not forget the women. History forgets them too easily.
Eventually, Philip had to rebuild his life at home. He remarried a steadfast and patient woman named Catherine, who helped raise their massive blended family. And his hard work kept paying off, get this. His continued success actually earned him a new land warrant. And guess who signed it? Benjamin Franklin himself. It's just an amazing brush with history for an everyday immigrant. And that leads us to Section 5, A Citizen's Final Legacy, from the first census to the last words.
Philip's experience with the newly formed United States government really brings his entire life's journey full circle. In 1790, a guy knocks on his door to conduct the very first United States Census. Think about that contrast for a second. Back in 1762, Philip was counted as a subject of the crown, counted so he could be arbitrarily taxed or conscripted by a king an ocean away. But in 1790, he's counted as a citizen of a republic simply so his family could be known and represented by a free nation.
Reflecting on that shift from being a subject to being a citizen, Philip simply says, the difference is everything. And honestly, that single, powerful sentence absolutely hits the nail on the head. That is the entire emotional and philosophical shift of the American Revolution right there. As Philip prepares his will in 1791, he has some parting advice for his grandchildren, and by extension, for all of us. He tells them to remember that their family came from nothing and built something worth having. But more importantly, he says, guard your citizenship, work for it, argue about it. That is what citizens do. He knew firsthand that being a citizen isn't some passive title you just get to enjoy. It is an active, demanding duty.
We've watched a guy cross an ocean, build a life from the dirt up, and survive the crucible of a revolution to transform from a subject into a citizen. After seeing the unimaginable sacrifices made by everyday people like Philip and Barbara to build a republic from absolutely nothing, the only question left to ask is, what are you doing to guard it? How are you going to use your citizenship today? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.